Hi, my name is Deb Krause, and I'm the Academic Dean and Professor of New Testament at Eden Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm coming to you from the Dean's office. I'm very happy to have this chance to provide a brief introduction for the Bible study that has been prepared by enterprising leaders of the Wisconsin Conference of the UCC to give us a way to prepare and come together for the Mutton Lectures in November, where we're going to engage on the subject of Paul and the interpretation of his letters as a resource for thinking about mission and ministry in the church today. As you go into the Bible study and move through the letters of Paul and looking at the focus text, there's just a couple of issues of introduction that I think might be helpful to you along the way. The first is the letters themselves. We tend to, in the context of 21st century Christianity with Bibles and in all different kinds of forms, think of Paul's letters appropriately as a part of our scriptural tradition. But it's important that we remember that Paul, historically speaking, when he was writing these letters, did not imagine that he was writing scripture. I often joke with my students here at Eden that if he did think he was writing scripture, I think he may have been a little bit more careful or measured in his rhetoric from time to time. But that is precisely the joy of these letters, that they are artifacts of Paul's ministry, and they are not filtered through some need or pious sense of wanting to endure for the centuries. They are vital and vibrant expressions of his leadership and context, and they give us glimpses to a kind of practical theology and a practical ecclesiology that if we have eyes to see it and the capacity to engage in reading them in this way, we have a gift beyond measure in terms of thinking about church and leadership and ministry. So one way to think about Paul's letters and how they inform the life and ministry of the church today is how they bear witness to Paul's vision of God's redemptive work in Jesus Christ, and that vision really is the reason that Paul starts the churches. And this will give us a chance to think about the whole concept of salvation and how Paul is working with a concept of salvation that is deeply Jewish and engaged within the formation of his Jewish thought, and that it is resourced by Israel's scriptural tradition, as well as his religious experiences such as, importantly, encountering the risen Christ. So Paul has that experience. He never knew Jesus historically, but he has this religious experience that changes his life, and it changes his perspectives. It doesn't convert him from being Jewish to being Christian, but it galvanizes his faith imagination and engages him in a project that really starts him writing these letters. And that project is nothing less than seeing himself as a collaborator with God in the redemption of the world. That's what Paul sees his calling to be. And so this is what the church is for Paul. The church is the vehicle through which God is redeeming the world. And we know from Paul's letters that there were different parts of the Jesus movement that were, as Paul understood it, really working on different projects. There was the Jerusalem Jesus movement, where Paul understood the gospel was really being preached to the Jews. And his calling was out in the Mediterranean, among the Greeks, among the people of Asia Minor, among Gentile people. And he understood that his calling and that of Barnabas and his other colleagues was to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. Paul's letters are very much engaged in encouraging these communities of churches to see themselves as alternatives to the messages of the empire of Rome, as alternatives in their imagination about who and what is sovereign. And that is a really powerful lens through which to read Paul's writings, because he is holding out a vision of church as an alternative community, as a place in which people are bound to one another in the Spirit of Christ, to model and bear witness to the power not of domination, not of hierarchical organization, not of competition, but of love. And we will see Paul in Romans and 1 Corinthians and 1 Thessalonians and Galatians lift up again and again the centrality of this virtue of love, and that it's that force and power that can both ground the church in its mission and purpose, but then extend the church the hope of overcoming all those systems and powers that dominate and oppress them. Paul was leading a movement that emboldened and encouraged and ennobled people to see themselves as God's creation, as people of God's Spirit, as people formed in the body of God's crucified and risen Son, who were called to live out a different power and a different spirit in the world. And that too is a part of God's work of redemption and God's salvation of the world. So these are just a few points that I hope are some helpful orientation to Paul's perspective, to Paul's context, to Paul's religious traditions and how they informed his writing and thinking, that will perhaps give you some lenses through which to read these letters. And the next steps will be your own study and discernment. And I very much look forward to working with you in November and in gathering with you to engage with these powerful artifacts of God's work in and through the church, and expressions of hope and challenge and courage that can inform our life and ministry in the church today. Thanks.